my mind, I yearn to fly home, back to where my mother waits for me. With an endless longing, I see the rushing stream, hear its rippling echo, as the waters rise through the mountains each spring. Marash, Ani, Dikranagert, Van. Once these were the names of splendid Armenian cities, centers of industry, culture, and faith. They dotted the broad expanse of Anatolia, bearing witness to a civilization that prized creativity, beauty, and religious devotion. Today, the world they embodied lies silent, its sanctuaries empty and destroyed, its ancient inhabitants dispersed. Nearly 100 years have passed since the Armenian genocide of 1915, one of the darkest episodes of the last century, when the homeland that Armenians had settled and cultivated for countless generations was violently stripped of its people. But the legacy of historic Armenia was not forgotten. Its memories, its stories, the names of its cities and villages were passed down from generation to generation. In 2012, 70 descendants of the survivors of 1915 returned to the land of their heritage to experience firsthand the lost world that Armenian Christians left behind. This is the story of their journey.
I've always wanted to come back to the homeland of my grandmother. The stories that she told me when I was a young boy about how beautiful it was, but she also told me some horrible things that I wanted to forget. My grandmother died when I was 16 years old, and it was almost as though a part of my life stopped. A part of the history, my history of who I was stopped. But it was interesting when I got here and I looked at the views and I saw the vistas that my grandmother probably looked at, and I walked the streets that my father walked, and I smelled the cooking that I used to smell when I was a young boy. They brought back my youth.
I had mixed emotions about coming. I wasn't sure I was willing to come and spend time in Turkey with the people who did this to us. But when I thought about it more, it was important to see where we came from. This is our history.
It's very important to see it. It's not enough to read about it. It's not enough to hear about it. In order to feel and understand correctly, you have to be here, you have to touch it, you have to smell it. That's what we did.
In the autumn of 2012, the Eastern Diocese of the Armenian Church of America led a pilgrimage to historic Armenia under the guidance of its primate, Archbishop Khajag Barsamian. During their 2-week journey, the pilgrims visited Ani, Armenia's ancient capital city of 1,001 churches. Van, home to the exquisite architectural wonder on Akhtamar Island. Zeytun, the enduring symbol of Armenian courage and perseverance. Kars, Sepastia, Marash, Aintab, Urfa, Kharpert, Arakir, and Gesaria. The pilgrimage took them to Dikranagert, the magnificent stronghold named for Armenia's King Tigran the Great. Its centuries-old Armenian church had spent decades in ruin and neglect. But recently, Armenians from around the world joined forces to restore St. Giragos Church to its former glory, and there the Armenian pilgrims worshipped before their ancestral altar for one of the first times in 100 years. Every step along the way brought moments of joy and pageantry. of return and recognition. But part of what they carried with them were solemn thoughts about the people who could not be there.
My father was born in Marash in 1899, and in 1920 he was drafted into the Turkish army as a 21-year-old young man. One day, a Turkish soldier, friend of his, told him that tomorrow they're rounding up all the Armenians. They're going to take you into the woods and shoot you. Well, that night he went AWOL, he escaped. He went home, he told his mother and sister what happened. They gave him gold coins, they gave him food, and he walked to Halep from Marash. I went to Marash yesterday. It was a moving experience to walk the streets to see where he lives.
My mother was born in Kharpet. She was 2 years old in 1915, and she lost her mother, her baby brother, and her aunt. And it was she and her sister, and they were picked up by a soldier, and that's how they were saved. My mother didn't talk a lot about it, so I wanted to see what this was like. And having seen it now, I realize how strong and tough she was.
It's very taxing on the emotions to be here, to be on this bridge, to see the decrease and to know that so many people died here. My grandparents were some of the lucky ones who were surviving and ended up in Aleppo and then in Lebanon and then in New Jersey.
When I first visited my grandfather's pistachio orchards, I was very touched and I started crying. Loudly crying, and I couldn't believe myself, and I was just completely overcome with the feelings.
When we were in the cathedral, we had a service, we had requiem service, and we sang Haimer. And what came to my mind was remembering my grandmother, my grandfather, and telling them in my prayer that I made it here. That as impossible as it may have been, and that they were never here, I'm sure they knew of Ani, and that I made it here and was able to pray in the cathedral with a group of Armenians freely.
I yearn to fly home, says the Armenian folk song, back to where my mother waits for me. After 4 generations in exile from their ancestral home, the pilgrims found not only their shared motherland, but the family ties that unite them still, to this day.
Armenians are one big family. Fate has cast them all over the world for tragic reasons, but that means that Armenians are everywhere, and Armenians are in every continent of the world. This trip was, apart from anything else, Armenians coming to Turkey. It was all these Armenians getting to know each other, swapping family stories, talking about cousins and friends, finding connections.
I got to experience not only my own family's home and getting to see what their lives were like here, but I got to see everyone's experience. I saw the homes of many of the people from the trip. They knew where a home was, or they knew the streets or the churches. And I felt like it was really coming home, a family reunion of a sort, even though for many of us it was our first time meeting each other, and for many of us a first time to Turkey.
Perhaps the centerpiece of the pilgrimage, and certainly its emotional highlight, was traveling to Akhtamar Island on Lake Van. Surp Khach, the Church of the Holy Cross, once among the holiest of Armenian places, where the sounds of joyful hymns praising God were as familiar as the music of nature. In the aftermath of the genocide, it became part of a vanished world, barren and silent. For the pilgrims returning there, filling the sanctuary again with the sounds of Armenian worship, made it clear that they had come to reassert the Armenian Christian identity of this holy place.
One has to reflect as an Armenian how special it is to have visited places like Akhtamar, like Ani, like Surp Geragos and Diyarbakir, and to be able to pray and worship in a church that we know Armenians have been in for over 1,000 years. that our voices, our prayers going up to God are probably the same prayers that have been uttered there for centuries.
Եկեղեցին հայկական ծննդավայրն է հոգվույս։ Թող այդ ոգին, may that spirit be a guiding spirit for us and for our children, for our grandchildren. Այժմ եւ միշտ եւ հավիտյանս հավիտենից ամեն։
Հայրս սեպաստացի է, ուզեցի երթալ եւ աչքովս տեսնել իր ծննդավայրը, որբեսի հոգեկան կոհացում ունենամ։ Մինչև այսօր այդ հոգեկան կոհացումը չեմ ունեցած։ Միշտ կուզեի տեսնել, բայց հիմա փախտը իրականացավ, եկա եւ ներկա եղա, հիմա հանգիստ եմ, գրնամ ամեն օր իմ հանգիստ կյանքս շարունակել։
What I'm taking with me is, trying to live up to what my ancestors lived and try and maintain and preserve our heritage.
I thought I'd be more angry. I'm not. I feel more peaceful now. I feel like I'm walking in their steps, and that gives me peace.
Behind the ruins, beneath the broken stones, the pilgrims found more than just 1,000 years of history. They found their history. They found their home.